question about funding. So how do we create a system in which students that are in charter schools receive adequate funding without undercutting the educational opportunities for the students in the district public schools?
Again, I think Chris's comments speak to the point is they're all public school students, especially when the district is doing the authorizing of those schools. They are part of their student body. Part of the money that's coming from the state is to serve them all. Over time, it's interesting. Different states' finance formulas work differently. But generally, we have school systems that are losing so many kids when they drop out. So, what's your district's worst dropout rate? Probably if it's like anywhere else in America, you've got districts that are losing almost half their kids without graduating. The cost of not succeeding is so high. You've got urban areas where student mobility throughout the year is so high. You've got lots of traditional schools where 60% of the kids are not the same kids that were there in the fall. You've got places, just incredible challenges in the districts as a whole, for which the short-term interruptions of having charters come on with 30 new students in their kindergarten class this year are trivial in comparison. And so the systems, not to trivialize the fact that finance is a big deal and everywhere we're supporting to make sure it's equitable, but these are big systems often with bigger challenges than the new kids this year in the charter schools that they're serving. So generally, if we can solve the problems of getting the kids to succeed and getting the families to stay and reducing mobility between schools, we can actually take care of other financial problems that are bigger drains on the overall investment in the public sector. I mentioned Denver before. It's similar to Nashville in terms of size and numbers of schools, and they have had 5,000 or 6,000 more students come back to their system in the last decade because they've created good charters and good district schools, and that is bringing more money from the state on the balance. So in the short term, there's disruptions, but if you create successful systems, it's totally going to pay off for the communities and the systems.
It's a false choice. Most of what we've done has been additive in terms of overall gains for the system. The research that's available on transition costs, just to take that off the bat, isolates maybe 5 to 6 in worst case scenario when adjustments are not made that we do make by virtue of treating these as our schools and additive opportunities for students in the district. Those costs evaporate after the first year or the second year, even in areas where they're not attempting to balance those costs out. But when you think about the lessons learned that have been described by these guys down here, when you think about these guys down here as school leaders who wouldn't be in our system leading schools without what we've done, when you think about the academic performance framework, our ability to manage and performance manage our schools to higher levels, the level of organic interaction and development and gain to the system far exceeds the investment that we've made. And the new schools that we've created are performing at a level that is giving us a short-term return on our investment that is greater than the schools that we were investing in previously. And unfortunately, that kind of analysis is quickly parsed into, well, that means charter schools are great, or that means that district schools are not great. And I want to say as clearly as I possibly can, that's the wrong discussion. The issue here is how can we bring as many great leaders into our schools, how can we get as many great results in our classrooms, and how can we offer choices for families that fit the needs of students so that every dollar that we invest in the public system here produces a return that is absolutely as great as it can possibly be toward our goal, because our goal is not more charters or fewer charters.
Okay, can I just say something? I think that if you step back, I think the conversation we have to have as a community and as a board and as leadership is, what is our theory of action as an organization? Are we gonna adopt autonomous schools, right? Or are we gonna go for a more managed instruction approach where, everyone's using the same math curriculum or reading curriculum, and I kind of joke, but everyone's on page 55 on Wednesday. There's merits for both, but the job of leadership and the board is to say, this is our approach. If our approach is autonomous schools because we really do believe as a community that that's how we're going to attract talent and we're going to push that autonomy down to the school level, then as a result, you have to reconfigure your central office to be able to implement that theory of action. And right now, 99.9% of the school districts in the country are organized around a theory of action that is not about autonomous schools. So it's not about money going this way and that way. It's what what is our approach, and then how do we organize our support team, our central office, to implement that approach. And it can't be one approach here and one approach. It's got to be an organized thing, and I think that's where we're missing the conversation. We're not having the conversation about what are we organizing our central office around. We're having a conversation around, like Alan said, a false choice. And I think that's where you all as community members have to push and talk to your elected board members who then push the man. I mean, that's how this works, right? And so
And
I
Chris,
think,
I think we'll have some questions probably about this
Yeah.
very thing. I have a good feeling, so I'll hold those
Right.
questions for that, and we can continue that conversation. And I want to get to a question that is a essential question, I think, based on how this conversation started. And so, Chris and Alan, I'm going to put you on the spot, but anybody else who would like to answer it on the record, I will let you do that. In your opinion, should state government be allowed to override local school board decisions about charter schools? Alan?
I get to go first. The reason to have independent authorizers is to take different looks at the quality of the initiatives and the merit of the initiatives to add value for students in the district. And if those perspectives are different on the merits of the application and the ability to add value and add capacity in the district, well then yes. And how that functions is really a matter for policy to decide. At the end of the day, the discussion about state overrule, from my perspective, needs to be about merit, and the state overruling body needs to have as rigorous a process, as quality and oriented process, as well-resourced a process as the process that they're commenting on and reviewing. And if they do that, then different groups may disagree, and that is probably how you get the best outcomes for students. But if they don't do that, and it's an extension of what is perceived to be politics at one level for politics at another, that's when we get ourselves into trouble.
Chris?
amen. I agree with that.
Good answer. All right, anybody else want to? Yes, please.
Let me weigh in briefly on this one too. I think it's really key that it's not just who does the authorizing, but what they do in that process, and so that they're using industry best practices, what we call our principles and standards for quality charter school authorizing. And as Alan was mentioning, it's one thing to have a state board that appeals the decision. In Colorado, our state board can hear an appeal when someone's turned down, and they can send it back. They remand it back to the district and say, bad call, you should have said yes, you got to deal with them. And that's sort of the standing law in Tennessee now, which ends up with the state saying to the district, you were wrong, you should approve it. What I like to summarize that as sort of a shotgun wedding. If they didn't want it, having the state tell them that they need to do it doesn't make them want it more. It just means they've got to deal with it. And then you look at that life cycle of all the charter school management. If an entity doesn't want to authorize a school, they should not be its authorizer. Someone that wants to and owns that school as one of their schools, as Chris said, should own it. So that's why I think the legislation that was proposed and still pending to have whoever does the second entity should do the job just as rigorously, make an apolitical decision, and after they've approved it, they should oversee it and own it for its whole life cycle.
So follow-up. So does that imply that the state then will assume the fiscal responsibility for covering the fixed costs that school districts continue to have even when students transfer to charters in the district?
This is one where it's tricky the way state finance formulas work. People think of it as, oh, well, this is there's state money here and the districts have this money, and each time a kid goes, there's a different amount of money. The way property taxes and equalization formulas have worked out over the last 15 years, when a school is approved by the state, quite often there is a formula where what the districts provide is dictated by how much money they have to give, not by whether they have the kids or not. And so I'm out of my depth for the way Tennessee's system works, but we have the vast majority of states now have viable non-district authorship options that are working within their state finance formulas that are leading to reasonably funded charter schools. So it can be solved, I guess would be the point.
Well, let me try to make it real at the risk of getting out of the kind of abstract that we're having here. Well, first of all, let me refer to my earlier point about fixed costs, and I'd like to discuss that at any length with anyone. But the issue in the end is whether or not this decision was made for quality and serves the best interests of the students. And at the end of the day, the families are going to make the decision about how many funds flow to the school by virtue of enrolling in that school. And you know, I do my best. We do the best we can. We do a good job, and we act in good faith to make non-political decisions based on a really rigorous process. You know, but we're not infallible. And distribution of school options for families is a very personal decision, and families want to know that their kids are, you know, loved, challenged, and successful in schools. And when they make those choices, if they do get those things and the results are there, you know, that's money well spent.
All right, I'm going to open up the last two questions in the 5 minutes that we have to anyone who would like to answer. In the education report for Nashville Next that we wrote for the mayor's office, Dr. Smirker at Vanderbilt and I wrote this in the report. In the absence of careful and strategic management, school choice policies and programs can produce separate and unequal systems. What sort of strategies do you believe should be employed to make sure that school choices are equitable and available to all students? So let's start at the end with Todd.
Sure. I would say a lot of things that they're working on here in Nashville. Really, I mean, I think common enrollment system is going to be really important, and really making sure that there's really good information out there so that all families know all their options that are available to them, so they can make the best choice.
And I would wholeheartedly agree with that. It really does come down to the communication that we are providing to the families when they are getting it, and how user-friendly is that information to really decipher for the families to make a choice.
Well, I'd say first the choices have to be quality choices, because if there's just choice, then that's not what we're after here. Two is parents and families have to be aware of what the choices are. And then three, the choices have to be accessible, which means you have to be able to provide transportation as a district so families can get to the choice. Because I just think there's so many districts out there that say, yeah, we're an open enrollment district, find your way to the school. And that's lame. That's not real choice. So I think, you know, it's got to be quality. It's got to be, parents have to be informed. They have to know what they are, and the choices have to be accessible.
Agree with all that, and seeing it in action in terms of common enrollment and outreach at Find Where You Fit festivals and selection processes, all of that is very good, and I think we need to report on what our values are around diversity and have measures around diversity, and those are aspects in the district that we've added as well, which I think enable this discussion to be very productive and fruitful. But let's be clear, choice does not cause a two-tiered system. We have a two-tiered system because choice is available to people who can move, or people who can drive, or people who have opportunities to transport their kids around or have information. Our system ought to be more equitable as a result of expanding that information and building schools with incentives to reach out and draw in families and find ways to welcome them in, while we talk about the very significant value that we get from diversity in our education and diversity in our community.
And I would only add ditto to everything else. We also have to create the institutions that mean that the specialized services we have are available wherever you go. And so that you're not saying, oh, the price of admission here is that you give up on some other good service. Now, schools have autonomy. They get to control lots of different things, but they don't get to say, oh, well, that kind of kid is too hard to teach. Our infrastructure of the supports and the systems that are run by districts and by states, and not necessarily by stuff within the charter school operators' control, need to be tweaked so that wherever you go, the services you find will meet your children's needs.
Okay, we're going to stop the panel portion right there, so we'll have time. I am going to invite our respondent up, and we'll leave the panel. Please stay where you are, and if you'll come up to the podium, we'll let you give a response, and then we will begin an open question time. By the way, let's give our panelists a hand in between.
Hi, again, I'm Robert Gowan. My company represents the big four school systems, Nashville, Memphis, Shelby County, Hamilton County, and Knox. And let me just give you an overview. We have 20-some charter schools in Nashville, about 40 in Memphis. There are 3 in Hamilton County, none in Knox County. So the charter schools are entities that our districts have been working with for a little over 10 years, going on 12 years now. And when I was asked to make a response. I thought a lot of the discussion was going to be about the pending, I think Chairman Mark White's here somewhere, but the pending legislation dealing with the charter school authorizer. And if I could, that was discussed a little bit, if I could talk about that just a little bit. And I'll say on the front end, we get accused a lot of times of being the defenders of the status quo, and probably what I'm going to say tonight's probably not going to help the reformers feel any better about that. But we think the authorization process right now works pretty good in Tennessee, especially if the goal is to have high-quality choices. I was going to say charters, but I mean, a lot of the discussion here was choices, not necessarily just about charters. Give you some statistics. Around the country, there's a study that Stanford University does from time to time, and I think this is the latest study, but they take a look at how well charter schools are doing versus traditional schools. 18% of charter schools do better than traditional schools around the country, 18%. Other 82% either do just as well or not as well as traditional schools. In Tennessee, the same study takes a look at individual states. In Tennessee, 50% of the charter schools do better than traditional schools. So we're getting high-quality charter schools. So you may be thinking, well, we need more. Another statistic for you, and again, this is an old statistic, and it probably changed a lot in Tennessee after the latest round of charter approvals this spring. I think the number is somewhere around 35% of charter school applications are approved around the country. Does that sound right? In Tennessee, that number is about 45%. So we're approving higher quality charter schools, and we're approving more of them. So I guess our question is, what problem are you trying to solve? If we're going to come to the conclusion we just need more charter schools, then you probably do need to go to a state authorizer. I would caution you, though, that if there are charter operators who, for whatever reason, don't think that they could, I mean, just speaking for Tennessee and the folks that I work with around charter schools, if there's some charter operators who are worried that they can't, if they're not going to get a fair shake in Tennessee, those statistics kind of prove otherwise. And I would just say, I mean, Alan Coverstone, he has to be the best person in the country doing what he's doing. And I've dealt with other people in similar positions to Alan. He really is one of the most thoughtful, reasonable people that I have dealt with in education policy. He's not some boss hog character that's sitting at the county line saying, you're not going to encroach on our turf. The last statistic I would leave you with, this last round of charter school applications, Metro approved 4 out of 5. Is that right? The one application that was denied was from an operator that the state board overruled Shelby County whenever that same operator wanted to open up 7 charter schools. That operator has closed 2 charter schools since August. I think those 2 charter schools operated for about 60 days. So we think that there's something to local oversight, but again, I'm probably not help my reputation as defender of the status quo, but I hope you'll consider those statistics as we continue this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate your comments. We certainly want this conversation to be balanced, and so this is the opportunity for you to address your questions that you may have. And certainly, if you have a question specifically for Robert, he will come up and address that question. And if anyone wants to comment on his comments when you address the question, feel free to do that. So what we'll do is just raise your hand. We're not going to bring a microphone to you. Yell it out, and I will repeat it for the camera. Go ahead. All right, and please ask a question. Leave your commentary very brief and ask a question.
And the other thing the woman that I wanted to lead in the question, give me 1 second, is we often talk, about the individual student and serving the needs of the student, and that improving all of our schools and the type of school doesn't matter. But if you look at the founding of public education in this country and why it rose up, it was as much about democratic institutions as it was about actually educating the child in reading, writing, and arithmetic. My question is, the discipline practices in charters is different than the discipline patterns where my children go to school. They're different than PE schools. How do we balance the good of the individual with the good of the society as a whole and the upholding of our democratic institutions?
Okay. So I don't need to repeat all of that, I don't think. I think everybody heard it. Okay, so we'll start. Who would like to address that question?
I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I'll just say that diversity is a value that we take seriously. We believe it benefits everyone in education. We believe it benefits our city. And that means we believe that diversity in school types is also valuable for the same reason that diversity in our interactions and the building of strong institutions is valuable. I think I'm not sure exactly what you're alluding to in terms of discipline practices, but I can tell you that discipline and behavior expectations are absolutely a centerpiece of any strong educational program, regardless of the school type. Different schools do it differently, but schools that, I guess the stereotype would be, discipline to the exclusion of student learning, definitely are not promoting social or emotional or academic benefits. And if you have strong schools that are achieving academically, they've figured out the balance in the behavior and the discipline. And so I just encourage you to evaluate that in a more holistic basis.
Yes, sir.
Chris Bartek, I have a question about Memphis specifically. Last summer, 90% of citizens of the affluent communities in the outer Shelby County voted to create their own autonomous board. In essence, a great endorsement of the idea of autonomy and choice. I've been struck by the relatively few calls for charters from Williamson County. Should we in Nashville kind of follow your lead or the lead of Memphis and to break out our schools in Bellevue, Belmead, Green Hills, to essence create micro-charter environments run by the citizenship to honor this principle of autonomy and choice that you're advocating? Thanks.
I mean, I don't know that necessarily the answer is create more school boards. I'm not sure that's the answer. I think that what the answer is to have existing entities create opportunities for educators